Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Andy Kine. Now, Andy is a comedian, he's a preacher, and he is a writer. So, Andy, it's fab to get you on the Godcast. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. I'm midway through watching the World Cup, and I'm enjoying that. So thanks very much for reminding me that I actually have a world outside of the World Cup.
Yeah, it's quite absorbing, isn't it? Have you just watched the Wales game, did you?
Yeah, I did. I watched that, and I try and watch all the games. If I don't have a gig to get to or a writing deadline to meet, then I'll watch all the games.
Yeah.
I actually do have a writing deadline to meet, but who cares?
Where's home, Andy? Where are we talking to you from?
Yeah, well, I'm currently in Stoke-on-Trent, which is ancestral home.
Okay, so where do you originate from?
Yeah,
Stoke?
from
You're from Stoke,
Yeah,
are you? Right, okay.
yeah, and currently there. I don't know what's going to happen next year, so we'll see. I suspect there's another move brewing, but for now, back in Stoke and having a reasonable time.
Good stuff, good stuff. So let's get down to the comedy, Andy. So you've been a pro comic since 2005. I was wondering how long before that was kind of on the horizon. Had you been thinking about it for a while? What were you doing? Just tell us about your pathway to becoming a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, that's a great question. I always wanted to be a comedian. I remember being 11 years old and writing an English assignment saying I wanted to be Rowan Atkinson when I grew up, because obviously he was Blackadder, and this was even before he was Mr. Bean. So I always loved comedy. I remember being off school when I was ill at the age of 7 or 8 and watching my dad's Faulty Towers videos and just being obsessed with them. So I was always, maybe obsessed is too strong, but I loved comedy. I loved laughter. I loved having a laugh. And those moments where you just collapse in fits of giggles or chortles or whatever, which become rarer as you get older, but it's still not impossible to experience. I love that sort of thing, and I love creating that in other people. So, yeah, it was on the horizon. Well, it was on the schedule for a long time. It was on the plan, the bucket list. But no one is a comedian. Obviously, I didn't know any comedians or any way of becoming a comedian, so it didn't seem likely. And then after university, I just thought, actually, you know what? I've done a couple of sort of graduate jobs, and I haven't enjoyed them. And it may be that comedy doesn't work, but I need to give it a go. And I don't think I was trying to do it as a hobby either. I thought, no, this is going to be my career. I'm going to try it as a career. There was never a sense that, oh, I'll do it on the side. Lots of people do that, and lots of people do that very well. But that was never a comedy full. It's either full package or not at all. So yeah, 2005, I did my first ever open mic gig, and the rest is sort of not very famous history, but it's nevertheless history.
How good was your first set? Were you really pleased with it? Do you still keep it somewhere in a bureau somewhere?
I remember two of the jokes. It went very well. It went really well. I don't know that I would because it was so fraught with emotion, and I almost ran off during the break before I was on. But yeah, the universe or the Lord or whoever you want to credit was absolutely providentially ordering stuff so that I would get on stage a second time. And I loved it. The first gig I ever had. I mean, I probably watched. Where are we up to?
So Andy, we are got a few unstable internet connections here, but you were talking about that first gig, and you're talking about those first couple of gags and landing them really well. I had a dabble at stand up, and I did some of these open mic sessions, and there's a big difference, isn't there, between going to do an open mic and enjoying it and being successful to actually turning this into a profession. So how did that happen for you? Did you decide to go it alone? Did you get picked up by an agent? Just explain to us what happened.
Yeah, I didn't get picked up by an agent. I have an agent now. I have done for many years now, but for many years I didn't have an agent. Really, it's simply about long obedience in the same direction. If you want to, and that applies across the board, whatever you want to do, there's no, the problem with things like X Factor and Britain's Got Talent is that they lull people into the false idea that you can just turn up and a chance ordering of events will cause you to hit superstardom. That isn't what happens in comedy at all. You do have breakout stars, but even those breakout stars have been working hard for a number of years, because no one's great. No one's good enough to be a sort of live at the Apollo comedian straight away. That takes a huge amount of work. So yeah, I just persisted, and I was in a position where I didn't need to make a lot of money to be able to break even. And also the comedy circuit wasn't completely saturated then. It was busy, but it didn't feel as saturated as it does now. Although I suppose post-pandemic, lots of people have given up or had a pause. So maybe it's back to those old levels. But yeah, I did a number of open mic spots, like loads of them. Then I started to get paid petrol money. And then over time, I'd get a little bit of cash. But it wasn't until I started doing gigs for churches that I actually started to be able to make a living from it, ironically. So yes, that's the sort of origin story. So it was 2006. I decided I'd start doing gigs for churches as a sort of resource for them. And it was probably too soon to do that. I probably wasn't good enough to do that at the time. But again, a lot of grace and a lot of favor on what I did. And I think because it was still fairly new, there wasn't really many people doing it. You could get away with more than you'd get away with now.
Yeah, I was wondering how different are you now, Andy, to then as a comic? Would you say how different are you in terms of confidence, in terms of courage to kind of try stuff that you perhaps wouldn't have tried back then? What would you say?
Yeah, I don't think I'm more courageous. I'm more, maybe, I mean, I always looked confident anyway. I'm more assured because statistically, I'm very successful. So, and that helps a lot. If you've been on a winning streak, the odds are in your favor. And having done this for 17 years and done over 2,000 gigs, and 95% of which have been wins of some sort, again, you don't have that same fear going on stage. It doesn't mean that gigs automatically go well, because a gig can go badly for any reason, but it also means that if it doesn't start off well, you've probably got some backup plans, because again, you've done this for a long time, so you've got an arsenal of sort of magic tricks to draw on. I don't mean literal magic tricks, but tricks of the trade.
Yeah.
And also, if the gig goes badly, well, it's part of the nature of the beast. It's not because you're a bad comedian and no one likes you. Maybe you weren't on form, but more than likely the gig wasn't set up very well. And there's always a context to good gigs and to bad gigs. And the bad gigs you can tell are going to be bad gigs before you go on stage, almost invariably. So it's not the case that if you go on stage and you're funny, people will laugh. That's not how it works. There's always a context. And the gig that you were at, I knew that was going to be an easy gig. 350 people there, and maybe, oh, that's nerve-wracking. 350, easy. The more people there are, the easier it is to make them laugh.
I was going to ask you about that, because as somebody who's not perhaps got the craft of being a stand-up comedian, but somebody who loves the genre of comedy, I love watching comedians for the craft, really. And I knew, watching you, for people who are listening to this, Andy did a fabulous set for the Blackburn Diocese, of which I'm a part, which was a room full of clergy. And I don't want to blow smoke up the proverbial, but I've seen a lot of comedians, but this was a gig that was rocking from the get-go, wasn't it, Andy? And yeah. I felt, watching you, within minutes you thought, I'm in here.
Yeah. It was one of my top 10 gigs of all time.
Really?
So,
really?
I mean, it's not, yeah, absolutely. One of my top 10 gigs of all time. And I think that's because it was just a perfect storm of connectivity. So similar worldview to the people in the room, similar sort of calling to the people in the room, similar pattern of scars from life experience. And then what I think also happens when you're performing to vicars or anyone who's a public speaker, they just have more respect for you from the get-go, because they know what it means to try and speak to 350 people. So, and then obviously drawing in the two bishops, which was clever, but also on a plate. You can miss an open goal, and that has happened with me. But I think what I like doing is just chatting to people, and the sort of crass way of describing that is, we pick on people. I don't pick on anyone. I talk to people. It's conversation. We used to do it before the pandemic, and but I do like to find people that you can have a run at a little bit, and who are up for it. And when you've got two bishops there, it's easy picking, because they're respected, but also people want to see them teased, because these are the people in ecclesiastical authority. So yeah, it was I did another gig 2 nights ago in the same venue, much smaller crowd because it was a different organization, and it went very well, but it was nowhere near the same levels. And so that's just it. You live off the adrenaline from the best gigs, but also good gig or bad gig, you go again. You just have to go again. And I think the thing which I'm enjoying at the moment is I don't feel as though I'm just into a routine of phoning it in, which I probably was coming out of the pandemic and maybe going into the pandemic. I do feel as though I'm getting my creativity back, and my zip and my zest and my swagger has come back a little bit. And I think that shows on stage.
Let me ask you, Andy, how much, we were just thinking about that gig, and again, for people who weren't there, room full of vicars and our two senior bishops, how much of that set was prepared? Did you know before, was it your intention to, I don't want to say go after the bishops because it was beautifully done, but was it your intention that they were going to be your targets, or did it just happen that way?
No, I didn't know there was bishops in there, so that was sort of spontaneous. But I knew how I wanted to start, and it's the attitude that you come on stage, which I think is key. It's not even necessarily your first line; it's the attitude. And so I knew the attitude I wanted to adopt, and I wanted to sort of reassure them and excite them simultaneously, or in quick succession, by saying, "Hey, I'm one of you, and also I'm really good at this." Which is often what I'll do. The first thing I'll often say to a church audience is, "Don't worry, I'm really good at this," which actually helps a lot, because they're not expecting you to say that, but they do want to know that it's true, and then you have to show it. But again, once you've got my first 4 or 5 jokes, you almost invariably you get people on side with that. So I know what my sort of first 4 or 5 jokes are. And I know that as I'm doing those jokes, I'll be gauging who's banterable, and then you go into it. I'm better at the banter than I am at writing jokes. I'm a good joke writer, but I'm better at bantering, and that's what makes me stick out from the crowd. And again, I think, although I wish it wasn't the case, I think there's something when people see a Christian engaging in that sort of level of stagecraft, I think you get extra points for that, because it's so unexpected. You just expect. There's still this idea that a Christian doing comedy, even if he's a professional, will be sort of quite laid back and quite twee and quite friendly, but not able to really, give it fisticuffs. But I'm as good at that as most people on the circuit. So you play to your strengths.
Yeah. A mate of mine, I'm guessing would be Tony Vino, who's another Christian comic who's seems to spend half his life on a cruise ship at the minute. But what's the difference between a Christian comic and a non-Christian comic, if there is one? Is there kind of is there that preconception that you just kind of touched on? This expectation of what you're going to be. One just as a comic, but in the comic fraternity, how are you received? You're part of the gang, as it were, or do you stand out like sore thumb?
I don't think we stand out like a sore thumb. I'm talking about me and Tony really here, who is my best friend and was best man at my wedding. So
Oh, really?
I do know.
You
I
do know him.
I do. I do know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I think the difference is not always that visible. I mean, the difference would be the sort of axiomatic difference would be that people like Tony and I see what we do as kingdom building and ministry, not primarily ministry, primarily a job in the world of entertainment and the arts, but absolutely ministry, absolutely about kingdom building. But I think there's also a desire to bless and not curse. There's a desire to punch up and not down. And, there's plenty of people who aren't Christians who do that as well on the circuit. But certainly I do comedy because I really want all truth is God's truth. And laughter is one of God's created gifts. And to be able to minister that in inverted commas is a privilege and something that I like to do. And I know Tony does the same, feels the same. So on the circuit, I suppose that I don't know that we're either one of the gang, because I don't know that there is a gang. There's probably some cliques, and I don't think we're part of a clique. But the thing with comedy, if you've been doing it long enough, you just have a sort of camaraderie with anyone who's done it a long time. So because we all know what it takes and the toll that it takes on you. So whatever your worldview, I mean, bear in mind, green rooms are not the place for sort of metaphysical conversations, but the people in the green rooms, they're your brethren in that world. So whatever worldview you're literally on the same team. If you're gigging with them, you're literally on the same team, because you want the night to go well and you're all in it together. So yeah, I don't know, that probably I did stick out more when I was a bit younger and a bit more zealous. I mean, I'm not less passionate about the gospel, but I'm probably a bit less zealous now, a bit more exhausted, a bit more grumpy because I'm in my 40s now. I think that happens naturally. But and also a bit sort of more humble and practiced in the way that I share my faith and engage with other people of other faiths. So that's an interesting one. I think I was a bit too influenced by sort of bombastic American evangelicalism, which I don't think is wrong, but it's right for that culture. And I think I've learned, again, particularly over the last few years, that the British culture is not the American culture. And so reverting to a sort of C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, J.R.R. Tolkien approach is what I like to do. Let's, instead of having a sort of scrapping match over, worldview, let's sit like two wizards around a campfire and smoke a pipe and share ideas and share stories. And maybe that's very postmodern, but that's what works at the moment. So yes, it's a long way of saying neither one of the gang or particularly stick out, but hopefully the people who know me see me as a man of integrity. I hope that's the case, and certainly Tony, who's a nicer person than I am.
Don't believe it. So, Andy, I want to ask if you're ever offended by comedy. I went to a gig and I don't know, I must have one of those faces. I got picked out by the comic who had made numerous gags about her vagina, and then asked me what I did for a living. And I'm not offended by any comedy, but I think other people in the room perhaps were. What's your take on it? Do you find anything? Is there a line that can't be crossed?
No, there's no line that can't be crossed, because I think it's a sort of, it's like screeding a floor; it finds its level, and maybe an interesting answer. Yes, I am offended by comedy, but I'm not offended by stuff that is anti-Christian. That grieves me, but it doesn't offend me. What offends me is stuff that is crass and gratuitous and rubbish.
Yeah.
So, you know, jokes that are just terribly underinformed. So using the sort of religion thing, the idea that, Christians can't use condoms or whatever. I've heard jokes like that recently, and jokes about, oh, Jesus never existed. It's just badly researched. It's crass, and it's stop doing it. If you want to do good jokes about why Christianity is false in your view, great, go for it. I again, primarily someone who is a writer and an artist, and I like to see good writing.
Yeah.
I like to see good craftsmanship. As a comedian, I don't care what your content is. If your craftsmanship's there, I can have respect for that. But I hate crassness. So that's what offends me.
Yeah. And in that huge plethora of stand-up comics that are around now and that have gone before us, which ones stick out for you as greats? You know, my kind of, I was a big fan of Dave Allen as a kid, and I wasn't a religious person then, but I loved the way he crafted his gags. Jasper Carrott is another guy who I thought was a real genius. What about yourself, Andy? Who are the guys?
Jasper Carrott was the first stand-up I came across, and really liked what he did. And then Frank Skinner as a teenager, I loved Frank Skinner's stand-up. I'm just quite fond of lots of stand-ups, really, because again, I think it's a lovely thing to do to make people laugh, and I like people who talk about stuff that other people aren't talking about. I like people who do it in their own way. People like Paul Foote, I'm a big fan of. James Acaster is great, and there's lots of others as well. I don't think I don't follow comedy very strongly. I don't, I was invited to go to the Peter Kay tour next year by a friend of mine, and I said no, I can see great stand-ups whenever I want for free. So it's and my view would be that the best stand-ups are the people who've just left the circuit and just got big. Being a big name doesn't get you better. But if you've just become big, if you've just gone on to Live at the Apollo stuff, you're probably sort of fairly well oiled. So yeah, I'm a fan of lots of stuff. I don't watch a lot of comedy. I'm too busy sort of listening to your podcast.
Do you know, Andy, I could talk to you all day about comedy because I absolutely love it. Do you, just some really honest questions. Do you aspire for that, the Apollo? Do you aspire for that big time, or are you content doing what you're doing? And just another double question there.
No, it's a great question. I don't aspire for it now because it's not going to happen now, and I don't see that in sort of self-loathing way. I'm not really on the circuit enough. I'm too busy doing my own stuff, my own tours, and my own writing and preaching now that it's just not going to happen. I'm not on that merry-go-round. I think I got quite close at one point about 7 years ago to that sort of thing, but it didn't happen. And I did think I really did want it to happen at that point, and probably thought it might at that point. But to say I'm content, no, I'm not content. You always want to do bigger and better gigs, but having lived through a pandemic, my absolute priority is to make enough money to support my family. And if I can do that through comedy, then that's the thing. So the primary aim at the moment, it's much more sort of expedient. It's do the gigs, get the money, do as well as you can, and then we'll think about. I'm just grinding out 1-0 wins really at the moment, and then we'll think about playing tiki-taka football later on. But no, I'm not content because actually I've got a calling to do gigs for churches, but church gigs are often hard because most people haven't been to comedy before, and so they don't know what to expect, and they're quite fearful. I may have said to you when we met at the conference, the difference between a secular gig and a church gig. At a secular gig, you've got 2 minutes to show that you're funny. At a church gig, you have to spend the first 5 minutes showing that you're nice, and then they'll let you be funny. So that's the difference.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because I sometimes wonder if enough in church circles, from somebody who has spent a long time in the secular world before entering the Christian world, it's almost like, I don't know if you agree with this, but I sometimes think that comedy is like it's almost like you need permission to go there. You need permission to laugh, and what you said earlier about the ability to make somebody laugh. It is a real gift that people have, but I sometimes think that it's not always held in the same regard as maybe somebody who can preach really well or pray really well. But
Yeah.
But being in that room in the diocese a few weeks ago, I came away from that and thought, I've not laughed like that for a long time. And you know, just on a personal level, Andy, you did me a world of good. I needed a good laugh, but I don't think that gets enough elevation, really. Do you agree or not?
I do agree. Yeah, I mean, there are absolutely pockets of affirmation and support for that. Generally, I think comedy is seen as an evangelistic luxury, something to be done if we've run out of barn dances to do. But I think when people just need to catch a vision for it, don't they? So I will get a lot of gigs off the back of the conference we did because people can see it, they can envisage it. And I do think lots of Christian ministers are a bit faux pious and a bit prudish and a bit fearful, and I understand why. But in Acts 17, Paul is he quotes from the Greek poets to share the gospel with them. Our society doesn't read poetry, but it does watch and understand comedy. And so actually, if we want to engage people in this postmodern world with the themes and the stories of Jesus and the gospel, then actually comedy is a really good vehicle done right. But fortunately, there's a handful of us who have been on the circuit, know what we're doing, and also have this heart for sharing the gospel. So I mean, I think it hasn't always felt underused. I've had periods, and have at the moment a period where I feel quite in demand. But again, it's been a few years since I felt that, and hopefully next year will increase even more so. But yeah, there's always a bit of cynicism, a bit of jealousy as well. Some ministers, because obviously a lot of preachers are inherently narcissistic and self-interested. Not necessarily. I don't really mean that. And Anglicans would be on the downside of that. I think a lot of independent churches and the newer denominations tend to be breeding grounds for megalomaniacs. You can cut this bit out if you want.
No, we're staying in. Now listen, we're both promoting stuff. I don't know if you noticed, I've got a book out, Andy.
Yes.
You're promoting the Charity Shield behind your left shoulder.
Yeah. I drew on penalties, so I shared it with Tottenham Hotspur.
But you have got a book out. I've got it here.
Yes, there we go.
There it is, hidden in plain sight. Clues you may have missed in the search of meaning. Do you want to plug it? Or are you not bothered?
Yes.
Plug it. Go on.
Yes, I do. So it's a very short book. It's short and it's funny and it's about Jesus. So those are the three reasons why people should buy it. If you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, it's short and it's funny. And it's about something that, may change your life. I still believe that. It's a book that seeks to share ideas, find and build a common ground with our human experience, find out what it is that we have in common as humans, calling that our little story, and then asking the question, okay, is there a big story, a worldview or a philosophy or a religion that makes best sense of that little story? And if so, which one makes the most sense? So that's it. I look at things like love and hope and beauty and purpose and death feeling unnatural and all of that, and then look at the different big stories out there. And I don't want to spoil it, but I still believe that Christianity, the story of Christianity, the story of Jesus, makes the most sense of our human experience, and that in him is fullness of life and fullness of joy. So that is where we end up. It's doing very, very well because it's non-combative, it's non-aggressive. There's very little to disagree with. I mean, I don't think that everybody becomes a Christian who reads it, but there's very little to disagree with. And I think it's just it's an attempt to persuade the postmodern mind that actually the story that we're holding and that we're gatekeepers to is still worth journeying with.
Yeah, I think so. I've just been fortunate enough to be out in the Holy Land and just literally got back in the last few days, and that's just reaffirmed my view. You know, and I think it's all power to the elbow for those who can talk about it. Andy, I really, really enjoyed chatting to you. You're such a great guy. You're a funny guy. I've loved, you know, maybe we can try and get you up to Burnley and do a gig for us up here sometime. That'd be fabulous.
Love to. Yeah.
So how's the weekend looking? Have you got gigs this weekend or?
Yeah, I'm in Maidstone tomorrow night, and then I'm preaching. Then I'm back on Sunday morning to Stoke to preach at my current home church, Newcastle Baptist Church. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, and if people want the book, Andy, how did they get it? You've got a fab website I was having a look at. Just tell people how they can get the book.
Yeah, well, the best you can link to it from my website. You can get to it from my website, andykind.co.uk. That's the place to go for all your Andy Kind needs. All
right, mate. Well, listen, prayers for your continued ministry in the world of comedy. You were fabulous. You really were. And you know, if anybody watches this and you know, go on Andy's website. You can book him for a gig there, and good luck with the book. And Andy, thanks for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bless you. It's been amazing.